Okay, so I'm going to help you get started with your worksheet, Solving Systems of Equations by Elimination. Remember that when we're talking about solving by elimination, we're talking about really eliminating, getting rid of one of our variables, x or y, it doesn't matter, and we do that by finding opposites. Okay, and opposites are those things that cancel one another out because they equal a 0 by the time we're done with our math. So we'll go through numbers 1 and 3 because they each present something a little bit different. I'm going to zoom in on number 1, and I'm going to take a look at what I've got. I do have my equations in a standard form. I can tell that because when I look at them, I have a number times x, that's my invisible 1, times a number y equals a plain number. That's standard form. I'm going to go ahead and take my pen and make my total sign and my plus sign. I know that I'm going to add these in columns. I'm going to add the x's to the x's, the y's to the y's, and the plain numbers to the plain numbers. What I want to do is start taking a look at my opposites. When I look at my x's, for example, I notice that they each have an invisible 1 that I'm going to write in, but they're not the same sign. So in other words, for them to cancel out, I would need one of these to be negative. So I'd have positive 1 plus negative 1. I don't have that. I'm going to take a look at my y's and see what I have. I do have opposite signs, but these are not the same number. So if I do add them together, I get 1y, which isn't really going to help me. I need something to be 0 to proceed. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to take one of my equations and I'm going to multiply it by negative 1. If I multiply by negative 1, I have to multiply 3 times. I have to multiply all 3 pieces of this equation by negative 1. I'm going to do that because when I multiply by negative 1, I'll end up with opposite x's. They'll both be 1x, but one will be a negative 1x. So let me rewrite here. I'm just going to recopy the first equation that doesn't change. 1x minus 2y equals 14. Okay. My second equation, I'm going to distribute that negative 1 with my arrows, and I will end up with negative 1x, exactly what I wanted, minus 3y equals negative 9. All I did was distribute that negative 1, multiply 9 times negative 1 to get negative 9. Multiply positive 3y to get minus 3y. Multiply positive 1x to get negative 1x. Now I can do my adding. I did exactly, or I created a situation to do exactly what I wanted to do. Now I've got a positive 1x and a negative 1x that I can wipe out. I've eliminated my x's. As I add, I'm going to go through and say negative 2y plus negative 3y is negative 5y. If you're still not really good at those integers, please grab a calculator. And last, 14 plus negative 9, which is the same thing as 14 minus 9 is 5. If I divide each side by negative 5, remember you have to divide by the negative, y equals 5 divided by negative 5, which means y equals negative 1. Okay, knowing that our final answer, remember we're looking for where 2 lines intersect. Our final answer is a dot, and I've got my y value of negative 1. Now I have to calculate y. calculate x using y. I know my y value now, so I can do this. I'm going to take either one of my equations and substitute in a -1 where the y is. I'm actually this time going to choose this equation, because what I notice is there are all positive numbers in here, and usually it's easier to deal with all positive numbers. So I'm going to simply rewrite that second equation, 1x plus 3y equals 9. And I'm going to put parentheses around the y, because that's what I know at this point. I'm going to take out the y and replace it with -1, because now we know y is equal to -1. One x times 3, or excuse me, 1x plus 3 times -1 equals 9. I've got to multiply positive 3 times -1, and that gives me -3. I'm going to carry down my 1x and carry down my equals 9. Now I've got a pretty easy problem to solve. I am going to add 3 to both sides to cancel out my -3. Now I've got 1x, or x, equals 12. My x value is 12. There is my final answer, my coordinate pair. Now we'll take a look at number 3. Number 3 is one of those that's already ready to go. It'll be a little bit quicker. When I put my total sign and my plus sign and I start looking at all my letters, I look at my x's, I notice that they each have an invisible 1, but they're not opposite signs again. So I might end up having to do the same thing I did with number 1, multiply everything by -1. But let's move forward and let's check out the y's and see what happens. Looks like each of my y's also needs me to write in an invisible 1. And they actually give me exactly what I need. I've got a positive 1y plus a -1y. In the end, when I add these together, they're going to cancel and make 0. That's what I want. I've eliminated my y's. So now I'm left with 2x equals -4 plus 2, -2. If I divide both sides by 2, I get x equals -1. Perfect. I've got my x value of my final answer. Now I get to choose between the first equation and the second to go back and calculate y. I need to, I'm going to abbreviate this word now. Calculate y using x. Okay. So I'm going to take the first equation because there's a plus sign in there on the left-hand side rather than a minus. I'm just going to rewrite 1x plus 1y equals -4. And I'm going to put parentheses around the x. That is the part that I know. So I will, in the next line, be taking the x out of the equation and replacing it with a -1. Here we go. Okay. I have to multiply 1 times negative 1, just negative 1, plus 1y equals negative 4. Got a pretty easy problem to solve. Gonna have to go plus 1, and I've got y, or 1y, equals negative 3. There is your second helper answer. So now you've seen one where the variables are ready to go, and one where you will have to multiply something by negative 1 in order to get opposites. Try the rest of them in your homework notebook, and we will check in again on Monday. Have a good weekend.